Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Modern Trivium Part 2, in which I get down to the details. Last time I went through sort of the historical and philosophical background to frame this series of lectures. This time, let's get down to it. But just again, a quick note summary from the last one is the goal of a classical education was to give people the power to express themselves and to achieve what they wanted to achieve in the world. And so you need to understand yourself and understand the world to be able to do that, and then to have the skills necessary to pursue your goals. And so always keep this in mind, because this is sort of the core of this. Powerful people gaining the skills necessary to be able to achieve their ends. So trivium, the actual trivium, was in three parts, hence trivium, of course. One, grammar; two, logic; three, rhetoric. So I'll take each of those in turn. Those will each be a lecture coming up. Then we'll look at the quadrivium and some other issues later on. So first, trivium part one, grammar. Now, grammar is simple in concept again. A little hard for us to grasp what they actually meant by this and how it was executed in the ancient world, so I'll spend some time looking at that. Fundamentally, this is about writing and reading. And so again, in the ancient world, literacy was quite rare, and so being able to not just write, but write well, and not be able to just read, but read well, these were extraordinarily rare achievements. Less than 10% of the population, certainly way less, is probably going to be literate at any level. And to be really highly literate in the way that they were striving for with the trivium, is a tiny handful of people. So this was something that would really set you apart. Curiously, in the modern world, the literacy is in theory no longer that rare. However, functionally, to be literate in the way they were talking about is still quite rare, which I want to talk about, and one of the reasons that I wanted to do this series. And if I've always talked about when I was teaching writing and teaching composition at the college, that the function of learning to write, of which reading is a part, hard to write without being able to read, of course, was to be able to express yourself in a way that writing was never a barrier to you, right? Like that you had the skills so that whatever you wanted to do, your writing would not prevent you from doing that. And people go, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. But, the grammatical and writing skills necessary to do that are actually a challenge to acquire. You don't come naturally. And in case I ever doubted this, which I didn't, having moved to France and having literacy in French roughly equivalent to a not terribly bright golden retriever, I can assure you that not having language and really not having a very full grasp of language presents a barrier, many barriers, to trying to achieve the goals that you have the capacities. You feel that inside you have the capacities, but you don't have the literacy, the grammatical skills necessary to express that in the world. I'm sure anybody else who's been an immigrant has felt this very powerfully. You see doors closed, you see opportunities shut down. You feel you want to express things that you just can't in a language that's not your native language, or another language that you have a very strong grasp of. And so the purpose of this is to of acquiring a high level of reading and writing is so that there is no barrier, or as few as possible that you might encounter in doing whatever it is you want to do. And just to give you a sense of how powerful this is, again, not that this is confusing, I would imagine, to people, but the levels of literacy also matter. This is the other thing. We pretend like it doesn't, and I've had many of my students over the years who have been very poorly educated. Their writing skills were just incredibly poor. It's not their fault. They just didn't write a lot, and when they did write, they were not being given appropriate instruction in the fundamentals of how to write the English language. And what this meant is that whoever was teaching them probably didn't know themselves. And two, it just made it a lot easier for them to go, oh yeah, you're fine. Oh yeah, you're fine. Everybody says, oh yeah, you're fine, then you pass. But if you look around at the world, if you look at people in important positions of power, if you look at people in the media, if we take them as sort of a bar in some ways, what you'll see, and this is weird in the United States, people rarely comment on this, but it's very strange. They speak a very uniform kind of English, and to the level that you can ever see their writing, it's not their writing is very sophisticated, but it is this very uniform kind of standardized American English that is easily recognizable. Now, what's odd about this is in a country of tens of millions of immigrants, you rarely see people on the news or interviewing people or being interviewed in the media anywhere who have strong accents. They're perfectly clear, perfectly literate, can speak perfectly well, but they have, very strong Chinese or Hispanic or Portuguese or, any kind of accent. Like, it's amazingly uniform. And so, for instance, even you don't hear strong regional accents. You don't hear strong accents from the South, because culturally Southern accents are associated with, sort of people being dumb, essentially, in the United States. Completely inaccurate, of course. It's a silly thing, but it is an accent, and so people tend to train themselves out of that. Unless, by the way, they want to do something where they want to present themselves as quote-unquote authentic, and then they'll tend to exaggerate or make an accent thicker. And you can see people working with this. But by and large, there's this incredibly uniform way of speaking and writing that gives you access to all kinds of different power positions of power that might be desirable for people. And it's okay if you don't want those positions, you don't want to do that. That's great. It's just that this is what they were talking about in the ancient world. They weren't confused about this. We tend to pretend like this is not the case now. And it's like, whether it's right or wrong, I would argue that this is not a very good system, but it is the system, and one needs to understand that and recognize that fully. A last example of this, by the way, I'm a huge fan of the NFL, one of my addictions, and the announcers for the NFL also tend to have very uniform, middle of the road, middle class white accents in a game which is not dominated by those people. So if you look at the broadcasters who comment, if you look at the people who call the games of this, and a couple of years ago they got a defensive back, and I cannot remember his name, and African American, he had a different pattern of speech. I think he was from Texas, and so he just had this very different pattern. I thought, oh, how refreshing, someone who speaks in a mode similar to way a lot of the players speak. A lot of the Southern white players speak. A lot of this sounded more like players than it did like all of the other people who are speaking. And so I thought, wow, there it is, right? The language issues are always there. So just don't let anybody fool you on this, right? Language matters. How you deploy language matters. I don't make the rules. I'm not saying this is a great system. I'm just saying this is a system, and this is what they were talking about in the ancient world, and that's what we're talking about today. If you have sufficiently high levels of reading and writing so that it's never a barrier to what you want to do, then great. This is what you want to achieve. This is where you want to be. Now, I wish I could do a full writing class with you. That's very difficult to do in this environment, of course. But I can give you a very simple set of guidelines that will help you. And the basic rule is, if you can write a single spaced page and make one grammatical error or one spelling error or something like this, no one is ever going to bother you. Your writing is fine. Like, this is the thing. If you can do it, be coherent, right? 300 to 500 words, maybe, depending on the page, right? Pages, how long is a page? And you make a grammatical error, no one who reads a resume, no one who reads a scholarship application, just in an email professionally, you're going to be fine, assuming you're not a copy editor, right? If you're a copy editor, this is a different subject. But for the written language in English, that is what you want to shoot for. If you can achieve that as like a rough bar, you'll be fine. And the best way to go about doing that is to write very simple sentences. These are boring sentences, but they're often clear sentences. And what happens, or has happened, what I've seen with a lot of my students over the years, is they've been told that long, flowery sentences with lots of big words make you sound intelligent. They don't make you sound intelligent. They give you the opportunity to make a bunch of really obvious and unfortunate grammatical errors or word usage errors that make it clear that you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. And it works to a certain point as long as teachers and professors are simply going, okay, you wrote some words on a page, have a B. They were long words and they were big pages, have a B plus or have an A, whatever the grade is. But when you go to apply for a job or you go to write anything professionally, or when the writing really starts to matter, that will instantly become a barrier. And so having that in your mind, that simple, clear, error-free writing is what people look for as the sort of barrier to entry. That's like your first barrier to entry. But if you can write a page, only make about one error or so, you're going to be fine in virtually any professional environment. A second element of this is the keys to writing well are very simple. One, again, write simple sentences. Two, get help. Right? There's this notion of that we have, this, I don't know, it's okay, romantic perhaps notion, probably a bad use of the word romantic, that, oh, you sit in a room by yourself and you just write beautiful things, and the first draft is going to be clear and concise, and it's going to be great, and then you hand that in, or you give it to your boss, or whatever. This is great. No, this is not great. This is ungreat in every way. What you want to do is give yourself time to, one, have other people help you with your writing, right? If you've got a draft of something, have somebody else read it. Then come back and go back over that. You're responsible at the end of the day, but it's always good to have other people help you. Use reference works. They're actually very sophisticated now. Over the years, the sophistication of grammar tools that help you as you're typing and writing, built into most, sophisticated word processors today, can also be very helpful. And so, being able to use spell checks, grammar checks, thesaurus, dictionary, have other people help you out. This is a big path to success. Practice, 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 and get help. And practice, get help, right? This is just, and pretty soon, it doesn't take that much practice and that much help, but pretty soon, your writing will improve to a level where you really don't have to worry about it too much. But always keep in mind that one reason writing was considered such a achievement in the ancient world, and to a certain extent, as I mentioned, it still works as a sorting mechanism today, is because writing is extraordinarily difficult. In fact, it is sort of what the Trivium was developed to address. Because to write well, you not only have to get the grammatical elements right, sentence structure, word usage, where to use a comma, these sorts of things. You also have to have your thinking be quite clear. That's a challenge. And you have to have something to say. This is a challenge. So getting your thinking organized and then writing a poor sentence, that doesn't work. Having a clear sentence that has no grammatical errors but has nothing to say or is not communicating your ideas because your ideas are confused, what you'll do is you'll clearly express that you're confused. So that doesn't work, right? And if you don't have access to the world, you don't have understanding of yourself, then, this is why writing is such a vexatious and difficult skills. And somehow, I'm not sure what happened in this, but we forgot this culturally. And we just want to pretend like everybody knows how to write, even though the quality of writing generally is incredibly poor. A little more about why that matters at the end. So, step one, or one aspect of this, is learning to write well enough so that writing is not a barrier to whatever it is you want to achieve. If you can clear that hurdle, this is what the classics are about. Now you can do what you want because this is no longer a barrier for you. So writing, and again, get help, give yourself time to get help, write multiple drafts, keep those sentences, Barzun, again, who I'm always talking about, has a book on writing, which I highly recommend, called Simple and Direct, in which he just says, just write simple sentences and make them as direct as possible. And you'll do pretty well. But that's difficult, but that is it. If you can do that, make them simple so you don't make grammatical errors, and state clearly what you mean, your writing will improve dramatically. So another part of this, or the second primary aspect of the Trivium, part 1, grammar, was reading. And this is another skill that we sort of have lost track of, because we've everybody can read. Well, most people can read, but reading at what level? Again, there's levels to this. And what the ancients thought, and this is sort of throughout not just ancient Greece and Rome, but also China, India, you see this all over the place. Basically, in any literate culture, Persia, they came up with this idea that's just repeated everywhere, that you want to read well enough so that you can spend time in conversation with great minds and great works. This is the goal of reading. And we've moved so far away from this that it's just hard to imagine. But if you want to read well, it means to be able to spend time with whatever classics it is that you have decided you want to study. So what happens today, in contrast, is they say, okay, well, here's a summary. Here's a 15-minute overview of the Iliad. Now, this will give you the plot points of the Iliad, or this will give you the main concepts that Heidegger is deploying in being and time, or what happens in Shakespeare's Richard III, or whatever. It is simply nothing, right? To the ancient world, this is nothing. Any fool can read that and get that. The idea, however, is to enter a conversation with the mind that has produced these classics. So you spend time with the Iliad, not because there's clear moral guidelines in the Iliad. People are always trying to say this when they talk about the Iliad. Oh, this was the guide that everybody aspired to in the ancient world. The problem is, if you read the Iliad or the Odyssey, what you immediately realize is all these characters are deeply, deeply problematic. Basically, this is the core of the plot. There are no, except perhaps Hector. Hector may be the one character, or one of the few characters in the Iliad who really is doing the right thing all the time in the right way. He is sort of an admirable character, but no one really talks about him. This is the interesting thing. But, Paris, Achilles, Agamemnon, Nestor, Odysseus, for God's sakes. Ajax, all these characters are troubling. They've created problems. They're confusing. They're vexatious. What they do, people go, oh, you should be like Achilles. That's this. People who have never read the Iliad think that you should be like Achilles. No one. He at one point is dragging a dead body behind a chariot, which sort of violates all the principles of ancient Greece, and so they have this mourning about this. And so, it is not a guideline. There's no clear, one or two sentence or one character you're supposed to believe in. It's a conversation that you live with. And so the reason you learn to read well, and this is the second part of this, is to read classics that are worth doing that with. And there's all kinds of reasons to read, read for pleasure. I'll read anything. I'll read the back of a cereal box. I love to read. Probably read too much. It's one of my problems. But the reason you read classics, and the reason you read classics in this particular way, is because it expands your mind. It expands your world. It is an opportunity to spend time with great minds who are exploring great characters or great philosophical ideas or great historical moments. And this gives you more insight into the world, gives you more insight to yourself, and expands beyond any realm that you could get within your own culture, within your own time. And so people talk about this, and there's this whole concept that's grown up, which I've talked about before, of, oh, we're just reading dead white men. And it's like, yeah, but why are we doing that? One, is it true? No. Two, why might we be doing this? The quote unquote canon, by the way, which is never said. But you want to read dead people. It's not to say there's no living authors who are worth reading. There certainly are. But the reason it's better in general to read dead people is because you have time to sort, number one. So if a work has survived for several thousand years, part of this is pure happenstance and luck. But the other part of this is that people have repeatedly and purposefully selected to say this work needs to be saved, this work needs to be translated, this work needs to be kept in a museum, this work needs to be updated, this, continuously for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, a century. And what that means is this is like a vote of confidence, like people over time saying this has so much value compared to everything else. 99% of stuff is just crap or mediocre or not that important. But this one, or these few works, really matter. So this is one reason it's good to read dead people. Another reason is you want people who are outside of your historical and cultural context. This is how you expand your mind. The classical age Greeks did not live in the world of the Iliad or the Odyssey. This was not their world. They were looking back at a vanished world that did not share their outlook, that did not share their structure. This was a different environment several hundred years earlier. And so this was a way, again, of thinking about where they are, what their world was like, where their world was going, by reflecting on the past. So when you read something from long enough ago that the author is dead, or maybe dead for 100 years, or 500, or 1,000, or 2,000, you're reading something that has survived, which makes it probably a much better chance of being valuable, and two, something that can take you out of your own world, out of your own habits, out of your own thought assumptions. One of the great things about reading the classical Chinese, or the classical Greek tradition in particular, is they have no reference to Christianity. And in the Western world, so many assumptions, the language, the outlook is suffused with all of these assumptions and concepts that we get from Christianity, that when you read somebody who's not arguing against it or in favor of it, they just don't have it as a reference. It didn't exist. You go, oh, wow. The ancient Chinese, this was not a thing. So their view, their outlook, their assumptions are just different. And this gives you the opportunity to free your mind, to expand your understanding of the world, to break out of thought habits. And so when you read in the classical way, what you're doing is saying, I want to enter into a conversation. I want to spend time with these great minds, these great characters. And it's not that they're going to agree, because they're absolutely not going to. Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov or Dmitry Karamazov is not Achilles, is not Mencius, is not Nietzsche. These are just different people, right? But it is all these opportunities to go, wow, this is a great thinker, this is great work, this will expand my understanding of myself and the world, again, back to there, because it is unlikely that you will have access to your immediate environment, to a collection of minds and writers and thinkers who are as great as the greatest thinkers who have been collected throughout the history of man, right? So this is so this is the point. Not just books, right? By the way, we'll talk about that too. You don't want to just read. You don't want to spend all your time reading the classics. This is another way of going wrong. But it is a really, really significant aspect of this. One thing that has developed, and this would be a Renaissance idea and later, so this is Renaissance and humanism in particular, later humanist idea. And I think there's a lot of merit in this. And they said that the only thing that is necessary for a great education is to read history, that history is the subject par excellence. And the reason for that is just what we've been talking about, because a good understanding of reading great histories really expands your outlook on the world and your ability to grasp the world and your ability to see maybe reflections of yourself where you didn't expect it, or to see something totally new that you never knew existed. And so there's an argument that's been made, and I think wouldn't say, yeah, this is absolutely it, that there's a great merit in reading histories, and particularly in reading histories from a previous time. Because again, histories written today are written with a series of assumptions and all this that may not be held earlier. And so you get not just a history, but you also get sort of a mind that is shaping, that is from a different culture, a different world, a different period. And so you get a very different sense of an understanding of the world when you read histories from different periods. So this is why you want to read the dead people, right? So when people say, "Oh, you're just reading, dead old texts," it's like, yes, exactly. There's a very good reason for this. Second, the white thing is just is just also not true, because you get the whole thing on racism and blah blah blah, but the notion that Greeks or Romans were white is that's only been around for about 20 years. That was when the notion of whiteness was invented by German thinkers about 150 years ago. It did not include, specifically to exclude the Latin and Greek. Like they wanted to, that wasn't there. Certainly China, India. These sorts of cultures, Spain, it's just silly. It's just a silly concept. You could exclude all the classic works from the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant world, if you like. Just never read those, and you'll still have, a lifetime's worth of classic works to read from dead people who are not in any way associated with being white. And then finally, the men problem, which is real, is simply a representative of the systematic discrimination against women throughout history. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't read living women. You certainly should. And you should also read the works of dead women. You certainly should. But to exclude the great works of the past because women were excluded in the past is simply to blind oneself to some of the great works of all time. And one of the beautiful things about our own period is we can look forward now and say in a century, this problem will start to really vanish, because they'll go, oh, now we'll have a collection of 100 years of great works by women. And so then it'll be just dead people problem. And that's good, because you want to read things by dead people. So that's why classics, to engage with and expand your understanding of the world in ways that are just not possible if you stay within a very small confine. Also, by the way, this is the problem with textbooks. Textbooks are a type of evil in general, I argue, particularly for this kinds of material. You can have great mathematical textbooks, I guess, and science textbooks to a certain extent. But the problem with a textbook is it is generally one by committee, always a bad idea. And two is trying to communicate information. Now, information is fine, but this is not what the classics are about. The classics and a classical education is about being inspired by and spending time with great minds who are grappling with great issues. That's it. And when you have a committee trying to grapple with efficient presentation of information, while you may get some information and it may be presented efficiently, this is not the same thing. This is not what a classical education was about. It's not about efficiency. It's not about information and facts, although those might be there as well. One of my great examples that I like to think about in this terms is Mencius. If you have any sort of overviews or something about Taoism or classical Chinese philosophy, it's easy to miss the fact that Mencius is hilarious, right? That he was funny. And actually there's a fair amount of Chinese philosophy that is funny. And if you don't get that, if you don't ever encounter it, then you've missed 70%, 80% of this. And it's sort of, because he does spend a fair amount of time poking holes in sort of all this overwrought and self-important, and he's, it's great. By the way, Nietzsche also funny, something that's often overlooked. I would say painfully often overlooked, that he's quite hilarious in many passages. Someone, I think this is why Derrida is so difficult for people to understand at times, is because he's making jokes. A lot of what he's doing is he's being funny. I mean, he's kind of he's performative in his writing style. It's theatrical in times, and so that when you don't actually engage with the mind, when you don't read the original, when you don't spend the time, you lose that. And this is what a classical education was about. Was literally about setting aside the time to spend with the great minds, having the reading capacity to spend it with great minds, and to be able to engage with them and to see the flavor and get this sensibility. So it's not about, when did the Normans invade England? It was about the sense of the world that the historian has, who's talking about this. So you're getting the history, but you're getting a whole lot more. The challenge here is this is what I call the Shakespeare problem. Without doubt, in the English language, like Shakespeare is certainly, sort of captain of the team, as it were, like very, very important, just hugely influential writer, unbelievably difficult to read. And so that's the problem with these classical texts. They're often not that friendly because they weren't written to be friendly. One, they're written often at remote times. And two, they're written by people who may or may not want to be like us, right? They had different outcomes, different views. They weren't trying to be efficient. They're trying to do other things. They're trying to express themselves and their ideas of the world. And so it's like, Shakespeare's really, really, really hard to read, like virtually impossible for most people. I've taught Shakespeare for many years. Usually about once a year I would do a class on Shakespeare, once every 2 years. And it would take an entire quarter of a class of training students to read Shakespeare to get to the point where they could read Shakespeare and enjoy it and have the plays start to come to life in their minds, because they really weren't written to be read on the page. They were written to be performed on the stage. But you lose a lot. Lots of the texts are cut. You just lose so much if you've only ever seen Shakespeare performed as opposed to visited the actual text. And Shakespeare may be a particularly difficult version of this, but I do think of it as the Shakespeare problem. And so how do you approach reading in this way? Like I said, I worked on the project specifically to try to address this, to give online stuff to help people and to get notes. But fundamentally, it is, I would say, do two things that are unnatural. Maybe three things. I would say three things that are unnatural in our culture. One is read slowly, right? It's like, I'm going to go spend time with my best friend. I want it to go as quickly as possible so I can go on and do other things. No, right? You got to get there. Like, you're doing other things quickly so that you can go and spend time with these great works and say, okay, so set aside an hour or so, because it's hard to read these things for any sustained period of time and really be with them. But if you can do a page in an hour, that may be spectacular. That might be great. So one, just go slowly. Sometimes you can go faster. It depends. Like Dostoevsky, some of his sections are incredibly rich. Some of them are like, okay, come on, you're getting paid by the word, buddy. Like you're padding it out, but he's definitely worth the time. But there are big books, and some of it is, sort of vexing. But take the time that's necessary, but you just be prepared to go really slowly. It's not a race. You don't get a prize for finishing early. It just isn't, because it is the spending the time with the minds that matters. Two, take a lot of notes. Mark those books up. Write notes. Look up references. My recommendation is usually read whatever section you're going to do. Maybe it's like, I've got an hour. I'll do these 5 pages or something. I don't know, whatever the section is. Just go through it real quickly, not quickly, but just read through it one time. Just go, okay, I got the lay of the land of it, and then go back through and go slowly. and then go through and take the notes and then go, oh, now I see this. Oh, now this makes sense. It didn't make sense the first time. But take those notes, write questions, answer back. By the way, strongly recommend this. If somebody says something that's just, you're like, what? Go, no. Like, stop and argue with them, right? Because this is the conversation, the spending time with them. It's not about, oh, they're right, I just need to take this all in. It's like, why are they saying this? Does this make sense? Hey, maybe I'm going to put a little note here and go, yeah, I'm not so sure this is correct, right? This interrogative style. And finally, if possible, find somebody else to talk to or a few other people to talk to about this. Because, invariably, talking to people brings out things that you didn't even know you knew. You'll say something and go, oh, wow, that's right. Yeah, I agree with that, right? Or hey, that's a good observation I just made. I didn't realize I had that in my mind. Like, conversation tends to drag this out and make it grow. And of course, other people will provide all kinds of insights and things you didn't see. And like, oh, I never would have asked that question. Or, oh, wow, what an amazing oversight. That I missed this incredibly obvious big thing that was probably in bold on the page and underlined, and yet somehow, flew right over my head. And so that ability to engage with other people and have these conversations will bring these classic works to life today. And you'll just start to live them and you'll start to see this. And then once you start doing this, what happens is you begin to see the relevance of these works, whichever ones you choose, everywhere. It's just everywhere because they've lasted for several thousand years because they do communicate in this way. I mean, this is why they're still around. If they didn't do that, if they seemed totally pointless and irrelevant, they would slowly die. And this has happened with works that in the past have seemed super important, and over time they just vanished because cultures change so much or styles have changed so much. They just don't seem that important today. Although later they might come back. So this is writing and reading. So for writing, again, it's just very simple. Write slowly, as again with reading, read slowly. Again, the opposite of what our culture tells us. Second, use reference materials, grammar checkers, spell checkers, other people to review your work, go through multiple drafts. This is the way you increase the quality of your writing. And just write simple and very direct sentences. In English, simple and direct sentences work. You make less errors, they're clear, and people love it. With reading, very similarly, read slowly, take notes, be interrogative, and if possible, discuss them with other people. You'll see the similarities of these processes, right? That to help them grow in your mind. And when you start to do this, it will start to change your pattern of your understanding of your self-expression, of the way you comprehend the world. And this is how that classical foundation of grammar was laid in the ancient world, so that your understanding of the world is improved, very important, and your ability to express yourself and to achieve your ends in the world is improved, very important. And it matters for many reasons, but another one that I'll leave you with here is when you start to do this, what happens is you're spending time with the great minds of the world. You're expressing yourself in increasingly clear language. So your ideas become coherent in your own mind and you can put them on the paper. And then you can compare those ideas to ideas of some of the great thinkers throughout history. This matters, and not just a little bit. This matters a lot. And perhaps the classic work here is The Politics and the English Language by Orwell, who wrote, of course, famously 1984. And the point Orwell is pressing in both of these, Politics and English Language, I can highly recommend. It's only a very handful of pages long, a great work on why all of this matters and how you understand the world and read and write really, really matters. And the point is that what politics tries to do with language and what advertising and all is they don't try to make you believe something that's wrong. That happens as well. But they try to eliminate the ability of language to have meaning. They try to take from you your capacity to think, so that what's red today can be called blue tomorrow, and what's blue today can be called red tomorrow. So if I just convince you that red is blue, that's fine, right? I've changed your definition of something. What propaganda really wants to do is make it so that you have no comprehension of the world, that you have no handhold, you have no ability to organize your own thoughts, to express them clearly on paper, and you have no ability to look at the world and organize it fully. And we're inundated with this because of advertising, because of political propaganda that surrounds us. And read Orwell. This doesn't need too much belaboring, but I think everybody's familiar with this concept. But I think people don't appreciate that this is specifically what a classical education was designed to fight. It was designed to try and help people think clearly, express themselves clearly, and understand the world clearly on their own terms, right? Not by saying, oh, well, this is what somebody told me, therefore I believe it. This is considered sort of academism, or there's many names for this, but it's sort of the Aristotelian trap that was fallen to in much of the Middle Ages, or just appeal to authority, the sorts of errors that happen endlessly. But this is the ability to free one's mind from the sorts of, infinite number of traps and confusions and bafflements that our world abounds in, so that we can then form our own ideas, hold them clearly, hold them up to the world, compare them to reality, and make judgments for ourselves and express ourselves. And so when people say, oh, your writing is fine, just fine. If it's filled with errors and you're not using the words correctly, but it's fine, right? That's fine. What they're really saying is, probably I don't know how to fix it, and I don't too bothered, it would take too much time. Also, what they're saying is, actually, I really don't care that you learn to express yourself. I don't care that you ever really have the capacity to think clearly. I don't care that, because you're never going to be in a position where it matters, right? This is something like, I don't really care what happens to you. Like if you knew someone was going to be your brain surgeon, you would be really, really concerned about their medical education. But because we don't think that it matters that how most people are educated, we're just like, whatever, it's good enough, it's close enough, it doesn't need to be that great, it doesn't need to be that clear, it doesn't need to be that error-free, that's fine, it'll do, blah, blah. That's the world. But the idea in the classical world is, because these people were assumed to be the people who were going to be in power, or they wanted to take power, you really cared. Like, everybody really cared. If for no other reason, then you're the people you were teaching, if you were a tutor, could have you executed again. Like, you could get in trouble if you really messed up. And so in a system, in a world that really doesn't care that much, it is important for us to care. For us to say, no, I really do want to be able to express myself. I really do want to be able to think clearly. And again, there's no shortcuts, but it's also not that confusing. Write a lot, write regularly, and write carefully, and your writing will improve, and soon you'll be writing much better than most people, because most people don't do this. Read carefully, read slowly, read the great works, whichever ones appeal to you. Not all great works appeal to everybody, because we're all different, time periods are different, we're at different interests, but just, search about, find the ones that work for you, inform yourself. And when you're trying to think clearly and you're spending time with some of the great thinkers and writers from the ancient world, or from 500 years ago or 100 years ago, or whatever it is, what you'll find is it really does begin to reshape how you think about the world, how you think about yourself, and how you feel about what's going on around you. It's really an extraordinary thing. But it's something that, again, pretty much we have to do on our own now, because this is not the way the world is structured. For good or ill, that's just the way it is now. And so here's an opportunity to begin this process ourselves. So thank you very much. So that's the Trivium Grammar, Part 1. Second part of the Trivium will be logic. So next time we'll look at a lot of the logical fallacies, the way we get confused, and sort of how to create a system for dealing with that. Thank you very much.